This is what I'm presenting today is a bit of a sort of concept. This is an innovation exchange. So, in a sense, I'm presenting a bit of a half-baked idea, a way of thinking about gaming conceptually. I really am exploring this topic. So, hopefully, you know, if you have any views and opinions of what I'm presenting today, I'd happily discuss them with you. With that in mind, every single fact I present to you today, I'd like you to treat as anecdotal evidence rather than rock-solid Six Sigma data. I want to put forward a very simple construct that building better surveys or doing any form of market research, and this thinking extends well beyond online research or any form of tracking study, is about focusing on rewarding the truth. That's my strapline for today. Traditional tracking studies are some of the worst culprits of market research. They're incredibly boring, not very exciting for respondents to complete. And we do hundreds of these things for all sorts of clients around the world, and you deconstruct them, and they're all essentially the same. They're built around three big areas: awareness, usage, and attitudes. All very dull questions for respondents to answer. And the ultimate impact is that they deliver back often some very shoddy data. I mean, that's a wonderful example we saw today with the P&G examples of what people said they did compared to what they actually did. I mean, just look at some of these things in some detail. Awareness questions, things like what brand comes to mind. If you ask that question in a face-to-face interview, you might get 5 responses, and in online, you're lucky to get 1 or 2. Are you aware of this brand? There can be up to 50% variance on that answer to that question, based simply on how you asked that question. Where have you seen this ad, for example, has huge misattribution, particularly for television. The problem is that all these questions are just tedious for respondents to answer, and so they can't be bothered to think. Likewise with usage, what brands have you used? Gianni Hoffmar at TNS does some fantastic research looking at this, and we only get that about 70% right. The last brand of toothpaste you've used, only 7 out of 10 people actually answer that question accurately. When have you used things? Now, simply by where you ask that question in the survey, you get a different answer. And we've done some experiments looking at that. You have this significant answer decay as people get bored in the survey. Here's a chart where we asked how much water have you drunk yesterday at the beginning of the survey, in the middle of the survey, at the end of the survey, and you can see it just drops off, the number of recorded instances, as people get bored. We discovered that if you visualized it, you could improve things, but it's still subject to decay. The other problem you have is that people lie and exaggerate. You know, for example, do you have an iPad? A lot of people want to pretend that they do. And ultimately, people can't be bothered to remember these sorts of things. And the other thing you have with usage problems is that they don't necessarily correlate with what's going to happen. You know, what mobile phone you've got right now is no reflection of what you're going to be buying in the future. And that's obviously very important consideration. Likewise, finally, with attitude, how much do you like this? Well, the biggest problem we have is people not being quite sure, and they're delivering back platitude answers. This is a not untypical chart. It's called a double camel hump response. People asked a question. So many people just say they quite like it, or they can't be bothered to think, and they tick the middle option. What words do you associate with this brand? You have lots of surveys covered in these sorts of questions where you're asking attribute questions, and people just can't. They'll click on average 4 times. It doesn't matter how many words are on the list, they'll click 4 times. If there's 4 words, they'll click 2 words. If there's 20 words, they'll still just click 4 times. Ultimately, when it comes to attitude, people struggle to differentiate their opinions. So that's a problem. And I'm here today to really talk about how gaming techniques can solve some of these problems. When you look at this situation, all roads lead to one problem. People can't be bothered to think. And surveys, if you think about it analytically, don't reward thoughtful or truthful responses. They're not geared around that. In fact, if you read The Power of Habit, it's a brilliant book, I recommend everyone read it. Surveys actually reward speeding. You have a process where you do a survey, you speed through it, and you get actually reward for doing it. Basically, you save time. So my thought is that let's use games as weapons, as mechanics, to reward people being truthful and putting more effort into their answers. And one of an example of this is Logo Quiz. I don't know whether you're aware of this. It's an app. It was one of the number one apps on last year. I think it was the number one app for about 6 months. People play this game for hours, guessing brands. Now, that's a piece of market research. If I took that same question and put that into a survey and showed them a logo, after 4 questions like this, what logo is this, you're reaching up to 40% of people saying, I don't know and can't be bothered to answer. The difference is, one is rewarding the truth. I get a prize if I come up with the right answer. And a survey doesn't reward the truth. Okay? What we've discovered, or what I realized, is that with a small twist of perspective and a bit of creativity, all 3 of those activities can be turned into games that reward the truth. And the rest of this 8 minutes and 30 seconds is to show you some examples. Awareness. Here's a lovely little mechanic we built within a survey where people, it's basically a text lookup process, and they get rewarded for guessing a brand. And what we do is we give them more rewards for guessing the more obscure brands, and it's a little game that they play within the survey. So popular, we actually have to put a time limit on it, because in a normal question, what brands are you aware of, most people will answer for about 15 seconds. This little game mechanic stretches that out to people spending 2 or 3 minutes doing it. What we're doing here is we're rewarding thinking. Prompted brand awareness is just a beautiful mechanic for gamification. And we've developed these quizzing processes where we present maybe a strap line or a logo like this, and we give them a time limit, respondents a time limit, and it's a game where they have to guess what the brand is, multiple choice game, and the faster they guess it, the more points they win. So they're under time pressure to get it right. Now, when you ask people repetitively this type of question without the reward mechanic, you get a completely different response reaction amongst the responding, I'm saying respondent 3 times here. Here's the data comparison. As a standard survey, this is the amount of time people spend answering this question. Repetitively, you ask people to name a brand or name a logo. You see that the answer time slowly decays. While the group playing the game, it's at a fixed level. In fact, it almost grows a little bit. And the time they spend doing it is really the speed at which they can guess the answer. So we're maintaining their concentration. And this is the payback. This is the comparison of correct brand recognition between the standard group and the test group when they're playing the game. They're actually recalling more brands. What effectively we're doing with this game mechanic is rewarding the truth. We also see lower misattribution to, well, a common thing is when people can't be bothered to think, where have you seen this advertising? I've seen it on television. Which brand is this for? Well, they named Colgate because it's the #1 brand. So we discovered when they're playing the game, the mentions of Colgate drop back. And this mechanic is so successful, we've adapted to all sorts of things. For example, advertising awareness. It's just so beautifully rolls into a game mechanic like that. Now, usage is a little bit of a harder thing to tackle because you can't really gamify whether you own something or not. We've played around with what might go as making it fun. For example, instead of saying, what have you done? You can turn it to a little bit of a game saying, if you had no money, what would you do? And using sort of latent brand preferencing techniques, which can make it fun. Volumizing techniques saying, what did you do last time? And the emphasis on interesting constructs. But the technique we've been playing around with is using what might call sometimes a game sandwich, where you ask people about what they do, and then you get them to try and predict what other people do, as a sort of loop of questions. And we've tested that out. So here's an example. You basically ask them a question like this: what would you drink? or what did you drink? And then you have a follow-on question where you ask them to predict what other people would drink, or in this case, the least popular drink. And then after that, they get a reward for getting it right or wrong. And what we did is an experiment comparing how people responded. And this is, again, the answer time data. The first line here is what they did, the time they spent answering the what they did question. This is the time they spent predicting what others did. And this is the time they spent reading the reward question. If you strip out those two middle things, and we compared it against a control group we just had the question. If you strip out the two middle points there, you'll notice that the people playing the proxy game were spending longer thinking about their answers. They were getting drawn into the process. The game was involving them emotionally and intellectually in the process. And they were spending more time doing it. Now, in this case, we were seeing a bit of decay as they went through, which is one of the common issues you face when any game designer has, is making a game continually fun. In this case, this game was a little bit dull. So that's one of the challenges. Now, attitude is rife for gamification. All sorts of attitude questions can be developed, made more fun in lots of different ways, and here's some examples. Word association is a really nice technique. Again, the same methodology. This is like Family Feuds. What words do you associate with this brand? And we give extra points for guessing the more difficult things, or maybe if there's a brand proposition statement, they get a bonus point for guessing those. People love doing that. They're spending a lot more time doing it, and we're getting up to 10 times more feedback from that, and we're recording all the guesses, and it's giving us huge amounts of information. And again, what we're doing is we're rewarding thinking. The other thing we played around with is actually fake ads, showing people fake ads and fake brand proposition statements as a way of measuring people's latent preferences or whatever about a brand. So this is a fake brand proposition statement about a washing powder, and they had to guess which one it was, and from that guess we can infer something about their attitudes towards it. What brand do they associate with whiteness, for example, and it's a game. Here's an example of a brand personality game we developed and published in one of our papers. What we did is we got them to play a game where they had to guess what brand a person was. And this was a warm-up process to then get them to think about brands as human beings. And then we had a follow-up exercise. They won and lost this game, and when they got good at it, we took them to the next level, where they then had to think about a brand in human terms and whether it has certain personality characteristics. And we do this with pairs of brands. And then we did a gamified process where they then had to gamble money on what the market thought which brand has what personality characteristics. And this is an example of how we did it. We tried to make the whole process fun, essentially. And then they bet money on whether one brand or another has a particular characteristic, and they get a reward of, they're trading money, and they can get a virtual sort of reward process of them doing that repetitively. What we found is it was a brilliant way of pulling apart the personality differences between brands in a way that conventional personality type work doesn't necessarily deliver. And what perhaps more important was how much people really enjoyed doing it. What we were doing, again, was rewarding thought and effort. This final example is something we're developing right now. It's an adaptation of X Factor, where this is the concept screening, where we ask people to pick a judge and pretend to be a judge, and then they evaluate products in the mindset of the judge. And so we present them a product a bit like they're in a television show and they're reviewing a product. And then we get them to talk about the product in the mindset of the judge that they've chosen to be, in a frank and open way. And then we ask them to predict whether it's going to be successful or not and what the audience would think. Would they vote it off? And we have this virtual vote-off process. And we gather all this information, and I haven't got any real detailed metrics about the data we're generating from this, but I can tell you we get about twice as much feedback from respondents compared to control cells. And this is, we give them some feedback about how they do in this task against the market. And this is a lovely chart. We ask at the end of every survey how much you enjoyed doing it. And this survey was in the top 1 percentile of all the surveys we've ever tested out. People love doing it. And I think, what we're doing is rewarding the truth. And so my simple proposition back to you today, a new philosophy for survey design, reward the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Fantastic
Okay.
stuff. We do have just a minute or two here if we've got any questions. We got one down here.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me?
It's coming on now.
Hello? There we go. Thanks, I really enjoyed that. I'm wondering what the primary challenges are you're facing selling this into clients and how you're overcoming it. I guess
It's a more sophisticated sell, and I think that the reason why we're doing this research, in very much perspective, because it needs to be backed up by data. That chart I've shown you with the number of people correctly identifying the brand, playing the game, it's just the most killer chart. It's a no-brainer. When a client sees that, they're on board. And I don't think, that's the way that we've been approaching this issue, with empirical evidence that it's effective.
And it's a done deal once you show the charts.
I've got a rolling snowball of clients now who are using that technique almost as a matter of course.
Do you face the question, I've got serious business questions here, and you're proposing a game to answer them. How is that possible? You ever face that?
We've used this technique for a corporate Bank of America on doctors, and it worked a treat.
Oh, I believe it. I love it.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if that's an objection that you typically get.
Yeah, I think you do have to pitch it in certain ways. I mean, often these games, you're not necessarily actually pitching them as games. You don't necessarily think that they're games. You can actually use the theory and apply it in quite a serious way. I mean, sometimes obviously you have to be quite professional in that.
And I guess that's a follow-up for the challenge that gamification is facing. I mean, we're calling it games, and I'm wondering if that hurts us in being taken seriously.
Yes, I think that you're right. It trivializes what is potentially a very powerful metric. I advocate going and reading, if you haven't read Power of Habit, because essentially what we're doing here is all centered around a reward protocol. The games can deliver a reward, and all we're doing really is giving them a reward for doing something. And, that happens to be labeled as a game.
One more.
John, quick question. You're making surveys longer. Do you have any learning on the perceived gap versus the actual length of surveys once you change the interface?
That is a challenge that I'm often making potentially surveys longer. But what you find is that I don't go to the cinema saying, is this film going to be longer than 20 minutes because that's my limit. I think about how entertained I am. And if you're being entertained, you can be entertained for an hour. You can be entertained for 2 hours. No technical limit to the length of a survey. There's just a technical limit to my attention span and interest in doing something really boring and repetitive. And if you can, I've developed a gaming survey mechanic that people will happily do for 2 hours. It's just a question of pitching it in the right sort of way. But to answer your specific question, what we found is that people will spend longer doing something. Their perceived length shortens. So they think that they've done it in shorter amount of time, although they've actually spent longer time doing it. Yeah.
I think we've run out of time. Thank you, John.
Okay.
Appreciate you
Thank
being
you.
here.
Okay.
Fascinating stuff.